There are two guarantees in life: death and taxes. So, the most frequent question that I get asked about buying property in Paris is, what are the costs, the fees, and the taxes? My name is Alexander Martin, and today I am going to be talking to you about Parisian property taxes and costs. We're going to be looking at the taxes involved when you are buying, owning, and selling an apartment in Paris, because this is all extremely important when you're setting up a budget to go about making that Parisian property purchase dream a reality. Having an understanding of these costs is, of course, an essential part of any real estate acquisition. And at this point, I do need to put in a disclaimer. I'm not a tax professional, and so it is extremely important that before you act on any decision, that you get the correct legal advice from a French notary and or your tax advisor. This being said, I hope that what we're going to go through today is going to give you a really great outline of everything that's involved and be part of the next step in making this happen. First of all, what are the costs and taxes that are involved when you are buying an apartment? The key number here is 7.5% of the property price. So this amount is what is commonly known as notary fees. In fact, 2/3 of it is made up of stamp duty. There is, of course, also a portion for the notaire, who is the equivalent of a lawyer in any French real estate transaction, as well as some administrative fees and registration costs. This can vary slightly in certain regions of France, notably in the Isère region, where you're about 0.6% lower, so that's good news for any of you ski fanatics. A very important point here to underline is that this 7.5% is for older buildings. If you were to purchase in a new building, you're looking at 2 to 3%. So that's worth bearing in mind, because if it's something that can be of interest to you, although there are a lot less in Paris, you are getting about 5% more space for your money, so worth keeping in mind. In terms of other closing costs, if the property is listed by an agency, then their fees are already included in the purchase price, so there's nothing extra there. However, if you work with a specialist buying agent, you will usually pay between 1.5 and 3% of the property price on top of that. A particularly important point to remember here is that the buyer bears 100% of the closing costs, but we'll come back to that a bit later. So you've successfully closed on the apartment of your dreams. You are the happy owner of a Parisian pad. But what is it going to cost you, and what is the taxman going to want on an annual basis? It's all part of the budget, so let's have a look at the costs and taxes during ownership. In terms of taxes, there are 3 types of taxes that you may or may not be liable for on an annual basis. Now, the first tax, which all owners pay on any property that they own in France, is what is called the taxe foncière, or the property tax. This is due once a year, about October, and to give you a guideline, a rough example will be about, for a 600 square foot apartment, so 55 meters squared, will be about 600 euros. Now, there are discrepancies in the amounts that costs. A good rule of thumb is about 10 euros per meter squared, a little bit more, but depending on the density of businesses, the density of construction, that can vary between different neighborhoods, areas and regions. But a good rule of thumb, again, 10 euros per meter squared, so keep that in mind. It is due every year about October by the owner of a property. The second tax is called the taxe d'habitation, or occupancy tax. Now, this tax is currently being phased out, so if it is a primary residence, then you will not have to pay it in Paris. However, if it's a secondary residence, then you still need to pay it at this moment in time. This tax is owed by the person who occupies the property on the 1st of January each year. So if the property is rented, then it is usually the tenant who pays that tax. Now, this tax, again, as a general rule of thumb, is about the same as the property tax. However, it does depend on your financial situation. It can vary, so there is no exact answer that can be given at this point. But again, around the same price as the property tax and payable by the person who is occupying the apartment on the 1st of January, except if it is a primary residence, in which case you are exempt. The third tax is called the wealth tax, or the impôt sur fortune. It sounds very scary, but in reality it is not. It is a tax that is charged on your total assets in the country over 1.3 million euros. Now, it's a digressive tax, so it goes up in bands, and it is charged on your net assets over 1.3 million. So that means if, for example, you purchase a property which is worth 1.5 million, however, you take a 500,000 euro mortgage, the net value is 1 million. And so you would not be liable for the tax until you repay enough of the mortgage to go over that 1.3 million mark. Now, once you do go over that 1.3 million mark, as soon as you hit 1.3001, then the wealth tax, or impôt sur fortune, kicks in. And the first tranche of that, the first bracket, is taxed on any wealth above 800,000 euros. So a little bit confusing, but as soon as you go over the 1.3 million euro threshold, you are charged from 800,000 euros. And the first bracket of that is 0.5%. So that means on the bracket of 800,000 to 1.3 million, which is 500,000 euros, you'll be paying 2,500 euros annually as this wealth tax. So that increases as you go up the levels. We're going to pop the chart on here so that you can see the tax brackets go up progressively up to 10 million, where you are going to be paying 1.5% annually on the total net value of your wealth in Paris. In France, even, again, please speak to your taxman, your wealth advisor, to get the correct guidance here. So there you have the three types of taxation. You have the taxe foncière, or property tax, which is for everyone to pay on an annual basis. You have the taxe d'habitation, or occupancy tax, for the person inhabiting the apartment on the 1st of January each year, unless it's their primary residence. And then thirdly, when you get into the higher price brackets, you have the impôt sur fortune, or wealth tax. And that's a pretty good coverage of the taxes that you will be paying whilst you own a property in France, in Paris. That's a brief look at the annual ownership taxes. However, it's also extremely important to touch on the general running costs that you're going to be looking at, as this, of course, is an important part of budgeting for any purchase. Now, the good news is that compared to our American friends, they're going to be a lot less. Notably, these are co-ownership charges, so building management fees. They can vary depending on what is in the building, so whether there's a concierge, an elevator, heating included. But if you budget, let's again use the example of a 600 square foot apartment, if you budget 200 euros a month on that, I think you're in a pretty good shape, of course, excluding electricity and internet. So now we have come back full circle, and it is time to sell. You're upsizing, you're downsizing, you're going to live on a boat and sail around the Caribbean. Whatever you do, there may be taxes involved on the sale. Again, it's the buyer who pays the purchase costs, but you may be liable for capital gains. First and foremost, if it is your primary residence, then you are not liable for capital gains tax, so that's great news. However, if it is not your primary residence, then you may be liable for capital gains tax. So let's just have a quick look at how that's calculated. Again, before any sale, please consult a French notary or your tax advisor. First and foremost, capital gains tax implies that there has been a capital gain in the sale. But how is it calculated? So an extremely important point here is understanding what number is used to calculate the capital gains tax. Now, it is not just simply the value of the property that you sell. You also can add a certain number of extra costs. Now, what are these extra costs? So in addition to the property sale price, you have any acquisition costs. In addition to the acquisition costs, you also have any renovation costs. So it's the three of those property price plus acquisition costs plus renovation costs. Acquisition costs are the notary fees that we talked about, that's 7.5%, and the renovation costs are a little bit more complicated. Now, you either have to keep all your invoices, which is absolutely fine and can be beneficial if you've done a lot of work to the apartment, or what can often be more advantageous is that you are allowed to increase the purchase price by 15%. It's a 15% fixed rate on top of the purchase price to account for any renovations that you might have done without needing to produce invoices. However, very important point here is that you need to have been the owner for a minimum of 5 years. So it's really this 5-year threshold which is important and allows you to add that 15% buffer onto the purchase price. Another incredibly important point to take into account, unlike with the wealth tax, is that there is no differentiation made for mortgages, no differentiation between equity and debt. So it is the purchase price and the sale price. That can be particularly interesting at the moment, where one of the real drivers of the Parisian market is the interest rates, which are incredibly historically low. So now on to the actual numbers and the tax rates. Capital gains tax is made up of two parts. The first of which is the tax, which is a total of a maximum of 19%. The second is social charges for a maximum of 17.2%. So the highest amount of capital gains, again after adding on the notary costs, the renovation costs, is 36.2%. Now this is the maximum. As soon as you hit 6 years, you start getting reductions on both capital gains and the social charges. Let's have a little look further at what these numbers are. Here is a little chart with the numbers for the capital gains. It is a linear reduction of 6% of the 19% per year up until 22 years. And for the social charges, it's a sliding scale up to 30 years. So you need to hold a property for 30 years before you get a full exemption of capital gains, social charges, so the ensemble that we call capital gains tax. So it's time to get your calculators out. So I think the key takeaways for the sales taxes is that you can be smart with writing off costs and notably renovation costs, but you should really be holding for a minimum of 5 years to get to that magic threshold. And the second key takeaway is that the total liability of capital gains, so increase in property price minus acquisition costs, notary fees and renovations, is a maximum of 36.2%, of which you are fully exempt after 30 years. Now, of course, there are different ways of structuring an ownership in terms of companies, different vehicles. So again, please, before making any purchase, consult your notary or tax advisor. So there you have it, the taxes and costs when buying, owning and selling Parisian property. Of course, these are guidelines and not financial advice, but if you have a project, we would love to talk to you, so please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Hope you found this helpful. Thank you very much for watching. Merci beaucoup. À bientôt.